I'm going to tell you something I've never said out loud, and I need you to understand that I'm not looking for forgiveness. My name is Luke. I grew up outside Charlotte in a family where cousins slept at your house, and your aunt's soup meant you were loved. I was the quiet one, not shy, careful. The kind of kid who watches everything, says just enough, and keeps most of himself locked somewhere nobody thinks to look. I married my high school girlfriend at 22. Had my first son at 23, my second at 25. Got a job at a distribution warehouse right out of school and worked my way up to supervisor. From the outside, my life looked like a straight line. Steady paycheck, decent house, good kids, faithful wife. I say looked like because that's exactly what it was. A look. Here's what nobody tells you about a life that's built straight and clean and orderly. It can be completely hollow and still function perfectly. The lawn gets mowed, the bills get paid, the kids grow. The thing in your chest that used to feel like wanting, it doesn't scream, it doesn't bleed, it just goes quiet. And you get so used to the quiet that you stop noticing it's not the same thing as peace. I didn't notice I was disappearing until the summer I met Claire. She'd married my cousin Derek about 3 years before that. Derek was the loudest man in every room he walked into, selling cars, talking money, laughing at his own jokes before he finished telling them. The kind of man who treats people like furniture. Not cruel exactly, just careless. He'd talk over Claire at dinner, forget things she'd told him, leave her standing alone at parties while he went to go be the center of something else. I noticed. That was always my thing. I noticed everything. What I noticed about Claire that summer at the cookout was that she looked tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. She had 2 young kids, a part-time job at a pediatric clinic across town, and a husband who'd already mentally checked out of the marriage even if nobody said it yet. She smiled when people looked at her, but the smile never touched her eyes. I recognized that look. I'd been wearing it on my own face every morning I sat in my truck for an extra minute before going inside. We didn't start talking right away. It was gradual. A joke here, a laugh there. One cookout turned into 2, turned into a birthday party, turned into a holiday dinner. And slowly, with no dramatic moment I can point to and call the beginning, something shifted. I started looking for her when I walked into a room. She started saving me a seat. We texted a little, then a lot, then every day. There was a night at Derek's house when she was in the kitchen alone, her back to me, shoulders tight, head down. I asked if she was okay. She didn't turn around. She said, real quiet, that she was tired of pretending everything was fine. I stood there for a second and then I told her I knew exactly what she meant. She turned around, and I swear the whole room changed. Not in some dramatic, cinematic way, quieter than that. Like the noise from outside just dropped and it was only the 2 of us standing there. And for the first time in years, someone was actually looking at me and seeing the thing I thought I'd buried so deep nobody would ever find it. That was the beginning. And I knew it then, same as I know it now. I just didn't stop. Within a month, we were meeting in secret. I'd pick her up after her shift, and we'd drive to a street near her house and park and talk for hours. Then we'd stop talking. And when I drove her close to home and watched her disappear around the corner, I felt like the worst person alive and the most alive person I'd ever been. Both at the same time. Every time. I kept a gas station receipt in my wallet from the first night. She'd bought a bottle of water and a pack of spearmint gum while I waited in the truck, and when she got in, she handed me the receipt and said, "Evidence." She was joking. I folded it behind my license and left it there for years. It was proof that something real was happening, that I wasn't making it up. But here's the thing, nobody who's ever done something like this will tell you. It doesn't end the way you think, it ends the way you deserve, except you don't get to choose which version of yourself is still standing when it's over. Let me tell you what it actually felt like from the inside, because from the outside, it probably looked like a man who had everything and decided to burn it down for sport. It wasn't like that. Lauren is a good woman. I need you to understand that before I say anything else. Not good in a soft, generic way. Good in the way that counts. She showed up. She was consistent. She worked. She raised our boys. She remembered things. She kept her promises. She was the kind of person who fixed problems before you knew they existed and never once asked for credit. If you built a list of everything a woman is supposed to be, Lauren was on it. Every single line. And I loved her. I want to be very clear about that too. But somewhere between 22 and 30, without any argument or dramatic moment I could point to, that love had calcified into something else. Something structural. You know how a house has load-bearing walls, the ones you can't take down because the whole thing collapses? That's what Lauren had become to me. Essential, invisible, unnoticed until I imagined the absence. That's not love, that's architecture. What I felt with Claire was the opposite of architecture. It was weather. It came through you, moved things around, left the air smelling different than before. I'd never had that with Lauren. I'm not sure I'd ever had it with anyone. And the terrible, clarifying thing about finding it at 30 is that you know exactly what it is because you've lived long enough without it to recognize the difference. I knew I was in trouble the night she called me instead of texting. It was nothing on the surface. She was driving home from a late shift. The kids were already in bed. Derek was out somewhere. She just wanted to talk. We were on the phone for 2 hours. I sat in the garage with the light off so Lauren wouldn't see the glow from my phone, and we talked about everything. Her daughter's first words, the patient at the clinic whose father wouldn't look the nurses in the eye, the song she'd had stuck in her head for 4 days that was driving her insane, a song neither of us could name, but she hummed it into the phone, and I laughed so hard I pressed my hand over my mouth to keep quiet. I didn't want to hang up. I sat in the dark for 10 more minutes after we did, just holding the phone. 2 weeks later, we started meeting in person. The street was near her house, close enough that she could walk home from the corner without Derek noticing the car. The first few times we kept it easy, grabbing food, talking in the cab. It was almost innocent if you didn't think too hard about what it meant that 2 married people were going to those lengths to be alone together. But you always know. You tell yourself you don't, but you always do. Here's the thing about guilt, it's not constant. That's what nobody tells you. It doesn't sit on your chest all day in a steady weight you can adjust to. It comes in waves. Sometimes it would hit me on the drive over, and I'd spend 20 minutes talking myself into turning back. Other times I'd get home after seeing her and lie next to Lauren and feel nothing except the specific shame of feeling nothing, which was somehow worse. And then there were nights when I'd convince myself that what I felt for Claire was simply the truth, plain and urgent, and that living a life in denial of it was its own kind of dishonesty. I went back and forth like that for months. Guilt and justification, a pendulum that never stopped. But I never stopped going to that street. What made it worse, what made Derek harder to ignore, even when he wasn't there, was the way he treated her at family events. He didn't change. Why would he? As far as he knew, nothing had changed. He was still the loudest man in the room, still talking over her, still wandering away mid-conversation to go find someone who'd laugh harder at his jokes. I watched her adapt to it in real time. I'd see the moment he interrupted her, the way her eyes would drop, the way she'd let the sentence die, the way she'd pick up her drink and look at something across the room. A quiet retreat, so practiced, it looked like nothing. It didn't look like nothing to me. Once, at a birthday dinner for my aunt, he told a story about a mishap at the dealership that apparently involved Claire and got the whole table laughing, except he'd changed the details. She had told me the actual version of that story. It was funnier, and she was the one who'd solved the problem. But in Derek's telling, she was just the comic relief. She sat beside him, smiling at the table, and I watched her not correct him. Not once. She just folded the real version of the story somewhere inside herself and let his version live in the room. That's the thing nobody talks about when they talk about this kind of situation. Nobody sat down and decided to have an affair. It was a long accumulation of small moments, of a man who never actually looked at his wife, of a woman who'd taught herself to need less, of 2 people in a dark truck on a quiet street, who finally, somewhere along the way, looked at each other all the way. We both knew it was wrong. We said so, constantly, said it like saying it made it slightly less true. She had 2 kids. I had 2 kids. Derek wasn't a stranger. He was family, the kind that slept at your house growing up, whose mother made you soup when you were 12 and sick. That's the part I couldn't escape, no matter how much justification I built. I wasn't betraying some vague social contract. I was betraying someone specific, someone whose mother had been kind to me when I needed it. That knowledge sat underneath everything like a cracked foundation. The house still stands. You just know it shouldn't. But I kept going back. By late fall, we'd been meeting for close to a year. Our Thursdays were the easiest. She had a half day at the clinic. Pickup wasn't until later. Derek worked long hours on Thursdays. I'd text her when I was leaving the warehouse. She'd be at the corner by the time I pulled in. We'd grab food from somewhere, drive around and end up in our usual spot. Engine off, windows starting to fog slightly at the edges. That familiar street so ordinary we'd stopped noticing it. That Thursday, it was cold enough that we could see our breath in the cab. The streetlight at the end of the block had been dead for weeks. Nobody had come to fix it. So the only light was the faint orange bleed from a window somewhere behind the wall and the glow from the dashboard. She was in the middle of a story about a kid at the clinic who'd swallowed a marble, and I was laughing before she even got to the part that was supposed to be funny, because that was the thing about being with her. I laughed early. I laughed easy. I couldn't help it. I should have been watching. Every time we parked there, I had a system. Check the mirrors every few minutes, watch the sidewalk. Keep one ear toward the street. A year of this had made it reflex. But that night, I don't know what happened. Maybe I'd been doing it long enough that I'd started believing nothing bad would come. Maybe I'd confused familiarity with safety. Maybe she was just telling the story, and I was just laughing, and for 10 minutes, I forgot to be afraid. 10 minutes. That's all it took. I heard the footsteps first. Fast on the pavement, the specific sound of someone not walking casually. I was already turning toward the window when the passenger door yanked open. The dome light flooded the cab, and standing there in the doorway, one hand gripping the top of the frame, breathing hard like he'd been running or like he couldn't breathe, was Derek. My cousin. Her husband. The silence lasted maybe 3 seconds, long enough for all of it to register on his face in sequence. Claire, then me, then Claire again. His jaw was locked. A vein ticked in his neck. His face was the face of a man holding something back that wanted out badly. He looked at her, just at her. And when he spoke, his voice was low, controlled in the terrible way that people get controlled when they are actually past control. "What are you doing here, Claire?" Not a question. A confrontation shaped like a question. She couldn't answer. I watched her mouth open. Nothing came. I sat completely still, hands on the steering wheel, heart slamming so hard I was sure he could hear it. There was nothing to say. There was nothing to explain. We were in a truck on a dark street at 7:30 at night, and the only thing written on both our faces was exactly what it was. He reached in and took her arm, firm, not violent, the way you grab someone you're pulling back from the edge of something. "Get out now, go home." She stumbled as her feet hit the pavement, and then he had his hand around her upper arm and he was already moving, his voice dropping into something low and continuous that I couldn't make out from inside the cab. She didn't look back. He didn't look back. They turned the corner and disappeared, and I was alone in the truck with the passenger door still open and the dome light buzzing above my head and the silence pouring in from everywhere. I sat there. I don't know for how long. Long enough for my hands to stop shaking enough to grip the wheel, long enough to understand that the year of careful, practiced clockwork caution had just collapsed in 10 minutes of forgetting to be afraid. I pulled the door shut. I drove home. And the whole way there, my mind ran the same loop. He's going to tell Lauren. He's going to call the family. He's going to be outside my house tonight. Every red light felt like a countdown. Every buzz from my phone felt like the moment it all came apart. But when I got home, Lauren was on the couch folding laundry. She looked up and asked how my day was. I told her fine. She studied my face. That way she sometimes did, like she was reading small print, and asked if something had happened. I told her I'd gotten into it with a co-worker, a scheduling thing, nothing serious. She nodded and went back to the laundry. I went to the bathroom, closed the door, and sat on the edge of the tub. My hands were still trembling. I didn't message Claire. I knew if Derek had her phone, my name coming up would destroy whatever slim chance of containment still existed. So I sat there in the silence I'd built, and I waited for what was coming. The longest night of my life wasn't the night Derek found us. It was the one after. I lay next to Lauren in the dark, listening to the ceiling fan click on every third rotation, running the same scenarios on a loop. He's calling the family right now. He's already told my parents. He's waiting until morning so it hits harder in the daylight. I checked my phone 4 times between 2 and 3 in the morning, the screen lighting up the bathroom, face down against the tile so Lauren wouldn't see the glow. Nothing. Not from Derek, not from Claire, not from anyone who might have found out. I went to work the next day because not going would have been the thing that made Lauren ask questions I couldn't answer. I moved through the warehouse like a man walking in water. Slow, deliberate, every motion costing more than it should. I checked my phone every 15 minutes, and every time the screen was blank, I couldn't decide if I felt relieved or terrified, because silence from Derek was either the best thing that could happen or the pause before something much worse. By noon, I started wondering if it was possible it would just go away. If Derek had decided the fallout wasn't worth the cost, if something in him had chosen to swallow it, it seemed impossible. But then again, a year of Thursday afternoons on a dark street had seemed impossible too, and here we were. At 4 in the afternoon, the message from Claire came in. Just a few lines. I read it standing in the parking lot, leaning against the side of my truck with the afternoon sun in my face, reading the same words 3 times before they arranged themselves into meaning. She told me the fight had been catastrophic, worse than she'd expected. He'd screamed at her for hours, called her things that didn't bear repeating, thrown a chair against the kitchen wall hard enough to leave a mark in the drywall. She said there was a moment, maybe 2 hours in, when she genuinely didn't know how it was going to end, but then something broke in him. He stopped yelling and started crying. Not crying the way people cry to manipulate. She'd seen that before with Derek, and she knew the difference. This was something she'd never seen from him. He collapsed into it. He told her he loved her, told her he didn't want to lose his kids, his family, the life they'd built. He said he knew he hadn't been present, knew he'd been careless and selfish, and that he wasn't entirely blameless in how they'd gotten here. And then he made her an offer. She could end it, all of it, completely, permanently. And he would never tell Lauren, not a word to anyone. They would move forward and nobody outside that marriage would ever know what happened on that street. But if she didn't, if she kept any thread of contact with me at all, even a text, even a nod at a family dinner, then everything came out. Lauren, the whole family, everyone. I read that message and felt 2 things hit me at the exact same moment, traveling in opposite directions. The first was relief. Enormous, physical, the kind of relief that loosens your legs. Lauren wouldn't find out. That was the thing I'd feared most, the thing that had made my hands shake the whole drive home, and Derek was offering a way around it. The second was loss. Not an idea of loss, actual loss, the kind that sits in your chest like something swallowed wrong. Because I understood what the offer meant. Claire was going to take it. She was going to choose her kids, her marriage, the life she'd built, and she was going to erase me from it completely. And I couldn't blame her. I couldn't even argue with it. It was the right thing to do, which made it so much harder to accept. I called her. She picked up on the first ring but didn't speak right away. When she finally did, her voice sounded scraped raw, the way a voice sounds after a night of saying everything and having none of it land. She was sorry. She had to think about her children. Her marriage to Derek was 8 years, and whatever it had become, her kids deserved a mother who tried. She'd made her decision. She was going to delete my number, block me, move forward, and I shouldn't reach out. I told her not to do it. I told her we should leave. Both of them, both marriages, both houses, the whole careful construction we'd each built of lives that didn't fit. I said we should stop pretending and just be together. I meant it. Standing in that parking lot with the sun going down behind the tree line, I would have driven straight home, packed a bag, and walked away from everything. For her. But she said no. She said it quietly, without anger, without cruelty. She just said, "I can't do that to them, Luke, I'm sorry." And before I could answer, she said she had to go. She hung up. I tried a few more times in the following 2 weeks, A message here, a voicemail there. Nothing dramatic, nothing that could be used as evidence of anything if Derek checked. Just enough to keep a thread open, just enough to feel like I hadn't accepted it yet, because I hadn't. Her messages stopped going through after a while. Then the calls. She'd done it. Actually done it. Blocked me the way you delete someone from a life. Cleanly, completely, without enough hesitation to leave a mark. She was gone. And unlike every other kind of loss I'd experienced up to that point, I had no one I could tell. Derek and I orbited each other at family events like two planets with colliding gravity, always finding separate sides of the room, always managing to never make eye contact. If I walked into the kitchen, he'd find a reason to leave it. If someone seated us within 2 chairs of each other at a dinner table, one of us would shift before it settled. People noticed because people always notice that kind of thing. I heard through my aunt that she'd assumed we'd had some kind of falling out over money or something to do with the business. Nobody asked me directly, and if they had, I'm not sure what I would have said. The wall between Derek and me was permanent. I knew it even then. Some things don't get repaired. They just stop getting worse, and you agree, without ever saying so, to call that good enough. But the wall I couldn't see, the one that actually cost me, was the one building up inside my own house. Lauren noticed something had changed in me. She didn't accuse me of anything. That wasn't her way. But her questions started carrying a different weight. Why was I so quiet at dinner? Why didn't I laugh at things anymore? Why did I pick up my phone and put it back down with that look on my face? The one like I'd just gotten bad news I wasn't going to share. I gave her the same rotation of answers every time. Work, tired, nothing, I'm fine. She'd nod, but there was a quality to the nod that told me she was keeping inventory, filing things away, tracking a pattern she didn't have enough pieces yet to name. I couldn't tell her the truth. And the truth was this: I was grieving. Not an idea, not a fantasy, not some romantic notion I'd inflated in my head. A real person, real conversations, real laughter in a truck cab on a cold night while the windows fogged at the edges. Gone. And the grief of it was physical in a way I hadn't expected. It lived in my body like a low-grade injury. I'd be driving home from work and catch myself drifting toward the exit that led to that street without making the conscious decision to go there. I'd hear a song she'd mentioned once casually, and my chest would tighten so fast I'd have to pull over and sit with it until it passed. I'd see a woman with dark hair in a grocery store aisle, and my whole system would respond before my brain got a vote. Not because of hope, just reflex, muscle memory of missing someone. It was like losing a tooth. You know how you can't stop checking the empty space with your tongue over and over, even when you know nothing is there? That's what it was, constant. Involuntary, infuriating. I never talked about it, not once, to anyone. I carried it the way you carry something heavy that you're not supposed to be carrying, quietly, without adjusting your posture, pretending the weight doesn't show. Months became a year became 2. I stopped counting after that. What I did instead was fill time. I took extra shifts at the warehouse. I coached my older son's little league team, showed up at every practice, learned the names of every kid on the roster, and their mothers' names too. I fixed up the garage, replaced the deck in the backyard, every plank myself, which took far longer than it needed to because I'd never built anything before. I planted things in the yard that I had no idea how to care for and killed them and planted more. I filled every waking hour with motion because motion was the only thing that kept the thoughts from finding me. And slowly, not cleanly, not all at once, the sharp edge of it dulled, not to nothing, but to something manageable, something I could put down for an hour at a time without it pulling. Through the family grapevine, I'd hear things about Claire. Someone would mention that Derek and Claire had gone to the beach with the kids, that her daughter had started kindergarten, that they'd moved to a bigger house on the north side of the city. Small mentions, passed around the edges of dinner conversations, the way families trade information about members who aren't in the room. Each one was like pressing on a bruise just to confirm it still hurt. It always did. 4 years went by. And then, in the space of about 3 weeks, 2 things happened that would pull my life in completely different directions. And I need you to understand that neither one was coming and neither one was fair. And the combination of both of them happening at the same time was the kind of thing that makes you wonder if the universe has a sense of humor or just a sense of cruelty. Lauren had been tired. Not dramatically so, just more than usual. A persistent ache in her left side she explained away as sleeping wrong. I noticed it the way I noticed everything, which is to say silently and with concern I didn't voice, because Lauren was not a woman who appreciated being fussed over. When I finally said directly, "You need to see a doctor," she waved me off. She'd go when she had time. Work was busy. The boys had things coming up. It could wait. It waited until a morning in late winter when she found a lump getting dressed. I remember exactly where I was when she called. Third aisle of the warehouse next to a pallet of motor oil. The fluorescent lights above me, the smell of metal and forklift exhaust. Her voice on the line was too steady. That particular kind of steady that isn't calm. It's the discipline of someone holding their voice above the waterline by sheer force of will. She said she'd found something. She said she'd already called her doctor. She said she needed me to come to the appointment. The biopsy came back a week later. Positive. Breast cancer. Stage 2, aggressive type. The oncologist used words I had to write down because I couldn't retain them in the state I was in. Chemo schedules, surgical options, timeline, recurrence rates. I sat in that office holding Lauren's hand while the doctor talked, and I remember thinking, with the particular horror of self-awareness arriving at the worst possible moment, that I had spent 4 years grieving a woman I chose over my wife, and during every minute of those 4 years, the woman I chose my wife over was quietly, invisibly getting sick. She had been getting sick while I was driving to that street, while I was sitting in that truck, while I was letting someone else's wife hand me a gas station receipt and calling it proof of something real. She had been getting sick for God knows how long, and I had been otherwise occupied. That thought sat in me like a stone. Lauren's approach to the diagnosis was, in its way, exactly Lauren. She didn't fall apart. She got strategic. She made decisions with the focus of someone who's been making things work by force of will her entire adult life. And the first decision she made was that nobody was going to know. Not her friends, not her sister, not my parents or hers. Not anyone in the extended family, which included, though neither of us said it out loud, Derek and everyone connected to him. She made me promise. Not a casual, sure, we'll keep it quiet kind of promise. She made me sit across from her at the kitchen table and look her in the eyes and give her my word. I don't want anyone feeling sorry for me, Luke. I don't want people showing up at the door with casseroles and that face people make where they're already grieving you before you're gone. I'm going to beat this. And when I do, nobody needs to know it ever happened. Do you understand me? I understood. She told our sons herself, sat them down in the living room and explained that Mum was sick but was going to get better, and that it was a family secret. Just the 4 of them, nobody outside these walls. I watched my boys sit there with their wide, frightened eyes, nodding with the terrible seriousness of children who've been handed something too heavy for their size, trying to hold it right because their mother was watching. Something cracked open in me in that moment. Not loudly, just a small internal fracture that I filed away to feel later. I said yes, I gave her my word. And just like that, I was the sole keeper of 2 secrets simultaneously. The one I'd already been carrying for 4 years, what I'd done, who I'd been, that dark street under the oaks, a receipt with faded ink. And now this one, my wife's body turning against her. The chemo appointments I'd need to explain away, the mornings that were going to get very bad, and the nights that were going to be worse. Nobody knew either one. And somewhere beyond the edges of my life, in a bigger house on the north side of the city, Claire was going about her days completely unaware that any of this was happening. Unaware of the diagnosis, unaware of the promise, unaware that if she walked back through the door right now, she'd find a version of me she didn't know existed. A man who had slowly, without intending to, started becoming something different than what she'd left behind. She had no idea. And then one afternoon, 8 months into Lauren's treatment, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I didn't recognize. "Hey, Luke. It's me. How are you?" 7 words. I read them in the driveway with the engine still running and the heat on and my whole chest going still, the way a room goes still right before something falls. I didn't need a name. I'd never needed a name. I sat there for a long time, and I felt it. The thing I'd spent 4 years burying, the thing I'd convinced myself had finally gone quiet, climbed back up through the floor of me like it had just been waiting for a reason. I sat in that driveway for a long time. Engine running, heat on, phone in my hand, 7 words on the screen. "Hey Luke, it's me, how are you?" The house was right in front of me, 20 feet away, lit from inside. Lauren somewhere in there with the TV on or a puzzle out on the table, the boys probably in their rooms. 20 feet and a whole life between me and whoever I was about to become. I thought about deleting it. I want to tell you I thought about it hard. But the truth is, the thought lasted maybe 4 seconds before the other version of me, the one I'd spent 4 years trying to bury under extra shifts and little league and deck lumber, was already typing. I asked how she got my number. She said she'd never actually deleted it. She'd told Derek she did, saved it under a different name and carried it with her the entire time, 4 years, like backup against forgetting. I sat with that for a minute. Then she told me about Derek. They'd separated over a month ago. It hadn't been dramatic. No screaming, no final scene. Just 2 people sitting at a kitchen table one Sunday afternoon and agreeing, quietly, finally, that they'd been done for years and everyone involved knew it. She said the marriage never recovered from that night on the street. Derek tried, and she tried, and the kids held them in place for a long time. But eventually even that stopped being enough. The trust, once gone, had never fully come back. You can live in a house with someone you don't trust, a lot of people do, but you can't make a marriage out of it. Not really. She said she'd been working up the nerve to reach out for over a month. She wanted to know if we could meet. Just lunch, she said, just to talk. I said yes before I'd finished reading the sentence. I told Lauren I had a work lunch on Tuesday. A thing with a vendor, complicated, might run long. She was having a better day that morning, sitting up on the couch watching a cooking show. Her skin still carrying that grayish undertone the chemo left behind, but her eyes more present than they'd been in weeks. She didn't question it. She just looked up and said, "Bring me back a sweet tea." I said I would. I drove to the restaurant, a small place near the lake, the kind of spot with wood paneling and booths near the back, the kind of place where nobody goes for a business lunch and nobody who knew either of us was likely to walk through the door on a Tuesday afternoon. I'd thought about the location more than I wanted to admit. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes before going in. I checked my face in the rearview mirror at some point, adjusting something about my collar, and then I caught myself doing it and sat back like I'd touched something hot. I wasn't a teenager. I wasn't going on a date. I didn't know exactly what I was doing, which was precisely the problem. I had a wife 3 miles away lying in a recliner because lying flat made the nausea worse. A wife who had asked me not to tell anyone about what was happening to her, who trusted me the way you only trust someone after 17 years of proving yourself, and I was sitting in a restaurant parking lot fixing my collar. I put my hand on the key. I was actually going to leave. Then I saw her. She was walking across the lot from the far end, moving fast, the walk of someone who's nervous and trying to keep it out of their stride. She was wearing a green jacket, her hair shorter than I remembered, sunglasses pushed up on her head despite the clouds. Thinner than before, older in a way that looked earned rather than lost. She was looking down at the pavement, and then she looked up and saw me, and she stopped for just half a second. Then she smiled. Not the open, easy smile I remembered, a careful one. The kind that's asking for permission before it commits. I got out of the truck. We hugged in the parking lot, and it lasted a beat too long, the kind of hug that knows it's more than a hug, but pretends otherwise. I could smell her shampoo, something with lavender, and for a second I was back in that truck on that dark street, and 4 years hadn't happened, and nothing between us was broken, and the whole world was just the 2 of us in a quiet cab, while the windows fogged at the edges. Then we went inside, and reality followed us in like a third person and sat down between us in the booth. The first 20 minutes were surface. Both of us being careful, stepping around the room full of broken glass, touching nothing. She told me about her new clinic, better hours, a commute that didn't destroy her, about how tall her kids had gotten, her daughter playing soccer now, her son obsessed with building things. I told her about my boys, about extra shifts at the warehouse, about coaching Little League, about the deck I'd built in the backyard that came out uneven on one end, but held. We talked like two people maintaining the fiction that we'd met here simply to catch up, to be civilized, to prove we could exist in the same room without it meaning anything. We both knew it wasn't true. She proved it first. She leaned back in the booth and looked at me. Not the surface look from the previous 20 minutes. A real look, the full kind, the one that had always undone me because it didn't flinch. There was something moving behind it, something I read as regret layered over hope, the two of them sharing space uneasily. She said, "You know, there are days I really regret it." I asked what she meant, even though I already knew. "Not leaving when I had the chance," she said. "That night, after Derek found us. You asked me to leave with you and I said no. I've thought about that 1,000 times." She picked at the edge of her napkin. Her eyes went to the table and came back. Then she said what she'd actually come to say, that staying hadn't mattered, that choosing Derek, staying for the kids, trying to rebuild, none of it had worked. The marriage was broken from that night forward, and all she'd done by staying was drag out the dying for 4 more years. She said she should have been braver. She said she was sorry. I told her she didn't need to apologize. I told her I understood exactly why she did what she did. And I meant it, because I had spent 4 years telling myself I would have made the same choice in her position. Whether that was true, I still don't know, but I meant it when I said it. Then she looked at me, really looked, the way she did that night in Derek's kitchen, when the noise from outside dropped away and it was only the two of us. And she said, "I know our timing was never right. I know a lot has happened. But I have to ask, because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering." She took a breath. "Is there any chance for us? Even now?" The restaurant noise fell away. The clinking of glasses, the murmur from other tables, the music someone had put on at a volume low enough to forget. All of it just faded. And I was sitting in the silence with the most honest question anyone had ever asked me, and everything inside me lurched towards saying yes. God, I wanted to say yes. I wanted to reach across the table and take her hands and tell her that 4 years hadn't done a thing, that I'd thought about her on so many nights I'd stopped counting, that the electric, specific pull I felt toward her was the same now as it was the first time she turned around in that kitchen and the noise dropped away. I wanted to tell her about the receipt, that it was right here in my wallet still. 4 years old, ink almost completely faded, still there, still folded, still behind my license where I'd put it the first night. I wanted to lay all of it on the table and say, yes, there's a chance, there's always been a chance. I never stopped wanting there to be one. But Lauren was 3 miles away. 3 miles away in a recliner, with poison moving through her blood on a schedule the oncologist had mapped out in a binder I'd read so many times the spine had cracked. 3 miles away, having asked me to keep a secret I hadn't told a single living person, having made me swear with a directness that I'd since understood was really about dignity. She didn't want anyone to watch her fight from the outside and start practicing grief. 3 miles away, trusting me the way you trust someone when you have no other option, and also every reason to. I sat with all of it moving through me, and I didn't answer. Claire began to read my face. I watched the hope in her expression start to dim. Not quickly, not dramatically, just slowly, like someone adjusting a light downward by degrees. She'd always been good at reading me. That had been part of it from the beginning. She saw things other people missed. She saw this. I said, "Claire, there's something I have to tell you, and I need you to understand why I didn't say it before." She went completely still. I told her about Lauren. I told her everything. The lump, the call in the warehouse, the biopsy, the diagnosis. Stage 2 aggressive treatment started fast. The chemo appointments, the mornings she couldn't get out of bed, the nights I heard her cry in the bathroom and didn't go in because she needed to have the thing in private. I told her about the promise, that Lauren had made me swear not to tell anyone, that this secret was as locked as any I'd ever kept. I told her I was breaking it right now by telling her, but that she'd come here with an honest question, and she deserved an honest answer. That was the only way I knew how to explain why I couldn't say yes. Claire's face changed 3 times while I was talking. First, surprise, total and unguarded. the kind that doesn't have time to become composed. Then, concern, flooding in behind it, her hand moving toward her mouth without her seeming to decide to move it. Then, something deeper, something that takes longer to name. Understanding maybe, or something close to it. The particular grief of realizing that the door you've spent 4 years deciding to open was never actually available the way you thought, and that nobody was keeping it from you on purpose, and that the universe is not cruel so much as it is simply indifferent to your timing. She said, "Oh my God, Luke, I had no idea." I told her nobody did. That was the whole point. That was the entire architecture of the secret. Nobody outside our house knew. She asked how Lauren was, how the treatment was going. I told her the truth, the cautious optimism from the oncologist, the setbacks, the fear, the way watching my wife fight something this hard had done something to me that I was still in the process of understanding. I told her Lauren was the most stubborn person I'd ever met, and that right now, in the particular hellish circumstances, that stubbornness was the thing keeping her going. Claire was quiet for a long time after that. The waitress came by, and we both waved her off without looking up. Then she said very softly, "I'm sorry I brought up all of it about us. I didn't know." I told her it wasn't her fault. How could she have known? She'd reached out because she was finally free, finally ready, finally brave enough to ask the question she'd carried for 4 years. And she'd walked straight into a wall she couldn't see. That wasn't her fault. That was just the math of bad timing and closed information. She nodded. Then she asked the only question left to ask. "So what does this mean?" I told her I didn't know what the future held. I told her I couldn't make promises about anything beyond right now. But right now, today, in this moment, I couldn't leave. Not because I didn't feel what I'd always felt. Not because the last 4 years had erased anything, but because my wife was sick, and she needed me. And if I walked out of my own life in the middle of this and something happened to Lauren, I would not be able to live with the version of myself that had made that choice. I told her it wasn't pity, wasn't obligation in the grinding, resentful sense. It was something I'd only recently begun to understand about what love actually is, after it's been tested long enough for the other thing, the fire, the pull, the electric aliveness of new wanting, to burn down to coals. Coals last longer than fire. That was the whole thing. That was everything I knew. She nodded. She didn't argue, didn't push, didn't ask me to reconsider. She just sat with it. And then she said very quietly, "You're a good man, Luke. Better than you think." I almost laughed out loud. A good man. A man who had spent the better part of a year sneaking around with his cousin's wife, lying to everyone in his life simultaneously, keeping 2 separate secrets in the same chest, without either one crashing into the other. If that was what a good man looked like, I genuinely didn't know where to set the bar, but I didn't say any of that. I just said thank you, and I meant it in a way I couldn't fully explain. We talked for a little while after that. Easier things, her kids, a story from the new clinic, both of us trying to make the exit survivable. She was better at it than I was. She always had been. She could smooth the rough edges of hard moments in a way I'd never learned. I just sat in them and absorbed the damage. When we walked outside, the clouds had broken, and there was late afternoon sun coming through, warm for the season. We stood by her car, and I thought she was going to say something else, something that would undo what I'd managed to hold together inside that restaurant. But she didn't. She stepped forward and hugged me, and this time it lasted even longer than the first one, and when she pulled back, her eyes were wet. She said, "Take care of her, okay?" I said I would. She got in her car, put her sunglasses on, and pulled out of the lot without looking back. I stood there and watched until she turned onto the main road and was gone. And then I stood there a moment longer, in the empty space where she'd been, and I felt something close. Not a door. Something more like a window I'd kept cracked for 4 years, letting in cold air from a life I'd almost lived, a life where I'd been braver or more selfish or both. I felt it close, and the silence on the other side of it was enormous. I went to a gas station on the way home, bought Lauren her sweet tea, stood at the counter while the machine filled the cup, and I reached into my wallet and took out the receipt. It was barely legible, just a thin, pale piece of paper with ghost marks where the ink used to be. The date, the price of a bottle of water, the name of a station that had since changed ownership. Almost nothing left. I folded it, but I didn't put it back behind my license. I slipped it loose into my back pocket, where I knew it would go through the wash eventually, where it was supposed to be. I came home with the sweet tea. Lauren had moved from the couch to the kitchen table. She was doing a puzzle with our younger son, both of them bent over it with the focused quiet of people sharing something that doesn't need words. She looked up when I walked in, saw the cup, and gave me a small smile, the kind she gave when she was too tired for more, but wanted me to know she was glad I was there. I set the tea down and kissed the top of her head. Her hair was growing back in patches, thin and soft as a baby's, and she was self-conscious about it, wore a bandana most days. But right then, in the kitchen light, with the puzzle spread across the table and our son pressing his tongue against his teeth trying to fit a corner piece, she looked beautiful to me in a way that had nothing to do with how she'd looked when we were young. It was different than that. It was the specific beauty of someone who is still here. Someone who decided to fight and then actually did it. I sat down and helped with the puzzle. And for the first time in a very long time, I wasn't somewhere else. The treatment ran 5 more months. There was a week in November I don't like to revisit. Her white blood cell count dropped so low they admitted her. I slept in that chair beside the hospital bed for 4 nights and told the boys she'd be home soon, and believed it less each time I said it. She hated the hospital more than she hated the chemo itself. She kept saying the sheet smelled like someone else's sickness, and I kept replacing her pillow with the one from home, and she'd fall asleep holding it, and I'd sit there in the dark, watching her breathe, running the arithmetic of all the time I'd spent distracted from this, from her, and not arriving at any number I could live with. She came home. She always came home. By the following spring, the oncologist said the word no one had said yet. Remission. Lauren sat in that office and closed her eyes when she heard it. Not crying, not celebrating, just breathing. One long, quiet breath in, and then she opened her eyes and looked at the doctor and said, "Okay, good." That was it. No speech, no breakdown, nothing for the room to witness. She just folded it inside herself and stood up and put her jacket on. In the car, she reached over and put her hand on mine. We didn't say anything for the whole drive home. Derek found out about Lauren's illness eventually. These things surface in families no matter how carefully you seal them. By the time it got back to him, the worst was over, and he sent a message through my aunt. Brief, formal, just that he hoped she was doing well and that he was sorry to hear it. He didn't reach out to me directly. I didn't reach out to him. The wall we'd built without ever agreeing to build it was still standing, and I suspect it always will. Some things don't heal. They just stop actively bleeding and you learn to navigate around the scar tissue. I never heard from Claire again. Not a message, not a call, nothing. Occasionally someone in the family would mention her name in passing, something about her kids, her new neighborhood, a job change. Each time I'd feel the familiar ache, but it was different now. Quieter. More like a memory of pain than pain itself. The way an old injury changes in cold weather. You feel it, you know what it is, and it passes. There are still nights when I lie awake, Lauren breathing beside me, steady and slow, the ceiling fan clicking on every third rotation, the house perfectly quiet. And in that quiet, I'll feel it. The pull. Not toward anything specific, not toward a person, not toward a choice I could still make. Just the pull of what didn't happen. The life I came close to. The version of myself that chose differently. The window I kept cracked for 4 years. I'll feel it like a tide going out, carrying something I'll never fully account for. And I'll lie there and let it go. Every time, I let it go. Not because it's easy, because I made a promise. And promises aren't just words you say when you mean them. They're the thing you keep doing on all the nights when it would be simpler not to. That's the actual promise, not the moment. Every night after. The receipt went through the wash 2 weeks after the restaurant. I'd left it in my back pocket knowing what would happen, and it happened. It came out of the dryer blank, completely blank, not even a ghost mark left. Just a thin white rectangle that could have been anything. I held it for a second, then I put it in the trash. Not with ceremony, not with feeling I can name cleanly. I just opened the bin and let it go. Proof that something was real. and then proof that real things can be released without disappearing completely. They go somewhere, they become part of the sediment of who you are, the part that doesn't surface anymore, but that everything else is built on top of. Last weekend, Lauren made pancakes. She burnt every single one. I stood at the counter and watched her burn them deliberately, almost, the way she sometimes gets absorbed in conversation mid-task and forgets there's something on the stove. Our younger son looked at his plate with the expression of a man being wronged, and he said, "Mum, you're terrible at this." She picked up a dish towel and threw it at him, and the whole kitchen exploded into laughter, the real kind, loose and unguarded, the kind you can't engineer. The smoke alarm went off. Someone fanned it with a magazine. The dog started barking, and in that moment, burnt pancakes, smoke in the kitchen, everyone laughing at nothing and everything, I felt something I hadn't felt in 5 years. I felt home. Not the architecture of home, not the structure of a life arranged to look like something. I mean the actual thing, the weight of it, the texture, the specific irreplaceable warmth of people you love being exactly where they are, doing exactly this, on exactly an ordinary morning that will never happen again because every morning is only itself. I'd spent years confusing fire for meaning, looking at what burned and calling it alive. But fire needs fuel and fire moves on. What I have in this kitchen, this cracked and ordinary and miraculous kitchen, is something that has stayed. That stayed through everything I put it through, everything I didn't deserve for it to survive. That stayed because she stayed, and I stayed, and we kept choosing it without always knowing we were choosing it. I'm sitting on the back porch now. The air smells like cut grass and rain. Lauren is asleep. The boys are in their rooms. The yard is quiet and a little dark and entirely mine. I'm not a good man by any clean definition. I know what I did. I know what it cost other people, and I know it cost me things I will never fully recover, which is maybe how it should be. Reckonings that don't leave marks aren't real reckonings. But I made a choice, the hardest choice of my life, made in a restaurant booth across from a woman I loved, while my wife was 3 miles away fighting for hers. And then I made it again the next day, and the day after that, and on all the quiet nights when the fan clicked and the tide went out and I let it. Choices don't just decide what you do, they decide who you become. I became the man who stayed. I'm not going anywhere. What would you do in this situation? Be honest, or did this remind you of someone? Tell me in the comments. And if this made you think about your own relationship, I left something in the description that can help you build something stronger. Subscribe if you want more stories like this every day, and share this with someone who needs to hear this story.